the mentality shifted when the accident happened, because that's what gave me like my purpose and my understanding of the fragility of life and how you gotta like actually just make things happen if you want to.
These days, musical artists have tough decisions to make when thinking about their own growth, like whether to sign a deal or stay independent. With the growth of online resources, both options can lead to success, but having the choice is critical. Just ask our guest this week, Cam Meekins, a hip-hop artist who made the decision to go independent and never looked back. Cam has had a roller coaster of a life, and his experiences have been a big driver in his success. Cam sat down with us to talk about his journey through music, the choices he made, and how he grew to be the independent success he is today on this episode of The Big Break.
So you're from Boston originally, and that's where you obviously, I mean, you're sort of known as being a Boston guy and whatnot. But let's take the Wayback Machine a bit and talk a little about your initial interest in music, just as a kid. Like what how did you first? What was like your earliest musical memory, or the time that where you heard something that really was like, wow, this is something more than just background noise?
Totally. For me, music has just always been a part of my life in different ways. When I was like super little, my older brother, they always tell this story that I used to like put on these headphones and like play this Fish CD. And like before I knew how to talk, I knew how to go to like track number 7 and play it because that was my favorite song. And so I think I always just had an ear for music and was just interested in music. And then when I was, in my early years, I started to mess around on different instruments because my brother, I'm one of 5. So, I have 4 siblings and a couple of them did music. And so there was different music instruments at the house, and I would pick them up and try and teach myself how to play drums and guitar. I just kind of got obsessed with it from a young age. I think I always kind of felt like that was what I was going to do. But I never really knew exactly how until later in my life.
Yeah, exactly. It's always the kids that have all the older siblings that get into the coolest music first, it seems like.
For sure. My brother was playing me like Will Smith and like Beastie Boys, and I was growing up like loving all types of different music, and he was kind of on his like hippie shit. I don't know if we can swear on this or not.
You can swear all you like.
All right, cool. He was just kind of on that vibe, and I think that shaped my musical interests a lot, kind of like jam bands and hip hop and, jazz and stuff like that.
So what inspired you to make that leap from, appreciating music, which we all do, to actually wanting to create some of it yourself?
I don't even know if I could answer that, because I think from when I was like 10 years old, I was like writing raps.
So it was always, they were always linked.
Yeah, I just liked performing. I think it was because I was the youngest, I was like a little kid. And when you're the youngest around like a lot of older siblings, you're trying to impress and you're trying to like perform and just like be active and like get the attention of the family. You know what I'm saying? And so I was always trying to like perform for like my like sister's friends when they came over, or like, whatever, just trying to like be on a stage. My medium was music.
That's
and like I used to just like make little rap songs. And then by the time I was in middle school, I mean, a lot of it's just kind of luck too in a lot of ways, because it's like I got a computer when I was in middle school that had GarageBand, and I'm sure that's a lot of people's stories nowadays in this day and age, that like their first taste of like real production and music was just like Apple GarageBand. I think Steve Jobs is like undercredited for how relevant he is to music and like just the culture of music, because I think that I wouldn't be an artist if it weren't for the fact that I just started kind of fucking around on GarageBand.
Yeah, exactly. The ease of entry at that stage of the world was a lot lower, obviously. But what I think is interesting is that you've always had the two. There was never one or the other. It wasn't like I'm just going to listen, or maybe I think I could perform it. You definitely took on both at the same time. That's an interesting component that I've not heard before, which I think is really telling. It's like there's a lot of kids out there that do some of that as well. I mean, everyone likes to put up their own little fun thing for their friends, on YouTube and things like that. Was there a point where you thought there was more than that though? Like, yeah, sure, I'm going to put my little funny rap up on YouTube so my, me and my kids in my class can look at it and whatnot. But when does that become something more or when did you realize that there was an opportunity more beyond just your circle, but like others that you didn't know were looking at it and appreciating it, even if they had never met, Cam before?
I think I always just had this. I mean, it gets a little bit into more of like my story, but like,
Well, that's what we're here
I
for.
always had, no, for sure. I've always had this kind of like entrepreneurial drive behind it. And I think that at the end of the day comes back to like understanding like my purpose. And the reason that I understand my purpose is because of like what I went through in my teenage years. And I had kind of this like life threatening jet ski accident thing that happened that I've talked about a lot. And like, I can tell that story for sure, but like, what
I think was interesting is if I, and tell me if I'm wrong on this one, because like I have done a little bit of background and whatnot on you. And if I understood correctly, you at first you were looking at maybe getting into audio engineering. And then after, and please do tell the story about the accident, but then afterwards you looked at more of a performer. Can you kind of maybe just start just before the accident, if that's in fact what happened?
Exactly. So like, I loved music, and like, when I was like younger, I was kind of like, I started getting success with music when I was 16, 17 years old. So like, this was all very early on in my life. So it's funny now as a 26-year-old going back, kind of thinking about this, I was a little kid doing a lot of this stuff. And like, even when I had success and like started to really do this, I was super young. But I was kind of like middle school age, like making songs for me and like kind of just to like show it off to my friends, like you said. And just like I like really enjoyed producing and engineering and like making beats on GarageBand at the time. And I would make songs too, but it was kind of just like a secret, you know what I mean? And then when I got into high school around like 14, there actually happened to be like a audio engineering class in my high school, which was like another thing. It's just like, that's luck. Like if I didn't have that class, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. And like those teachers that saw that potential in me when I was not a good student in other traditional areas, pushed me to be good on the music side. Like those are things that I couldn't kind of like count on. It just happened in that way. So like a lot of that I think is a part of my story too. That's kind of the randomness of all of this for sure. But yeah, so like I was just kind of really plugged into that community of like the kids who were like really into making music, and I was on the production side and on the engineering side. I was loving to like make beats for these kids, and they were rapping, and I kind of knew that I could rap too, but the mentality shifted when the accident happened, because that's what gave me like my purpose and my understanding of the fragility of life and how you got to like actually just make things happen if you want to, and not, I think when you're young, you're kind of like, one, you don't really understand that life is very fragile like that. You usually don't learn stuff like that until later in your life when you deal with death or you deal with things like that. But I got that lesson at a very young age, kind of having that life-threatening experience. And it just shifted my mentality to, I was like, damn, like, what do I want out of my life? Like, what makes me happy? And like, I don't care about what other people think anymore, because it's like, I'm not going to care about what people think when I'm in the ground.
So, briefly, why don't you just explain what happened? You mentioned jet ski.
Yeah. So I was somewhere in the Caribbean, and like with some people on a jet ski, and I was like 15 years old. And basically we had been out there for like 30 minutes, and then we were going back to like turn in the jet skis. We like had them rented or whatever, and I'm just kind of like posted up in the water, like pretty far out in the ocean. And one of the kids that I was with like basically lost control of his jet ski, and kind of like ran into mine and like hit me at like full speed. And so I ended up getting knocked into the water.
I mean, that's like getting hit by a car.
Ended up having it was serious for sure. And like, we were in St. Martin, which is like, just like an island, with not that much infrastructure for like, emergency.
You're not heading over to
situation.
Cedar Sinai.
Yeah. So, it was just a crazy, crazy experience. And so I ruptured my spleen, broke ribs, had like my chin was all fucked up, and like, I was basically bleeding out, and I had to have emergency surgery because I was bleeding out. And like, a lot of it for me was just the traumatic aspect of being so young and like dealing with that, and like not having my family there because I was like with a different family.
So yeah, you're pretty shaken up.
Yeah, I was just like, I didn't know, because there was also a little bit of like a language barrier there because they speak like French down there too. And so, they were kind of like, oh, like, I kind of interpreted it like I'm gonna bleed to death.
Yeah.
Like, what I'm saying? Like that's kind of how it felt.
Okay. And then plus you're a minor and like the whole approvals for surgeries and all those types of things.
Yeah. So it just was, and like, this is like a kind of nuts experience. Like the whole thing, like that's why, like, I just, I believe in God, and I believe in like, the power of the universe, and just all this different stuff, because like so much of what's happened in my life has been like, kind of like just like weird to me. And like, for example, one of the best surgeons in the world for these type of surgeries happens to be a guy who's from St. Martin originally and then moved to the United States and became this like world-renowned surgeon, was back in St. Martin for the week doing like basically like free work at this hospital, like just to be a good guy, and ended up being there when my accident happened and doing the surgery on me. And like seriously, this dude's like one of the best surgeons in the world. And he was just there, like just off the strength of like, doing something for the community. And it just so happened that I had my accident at the same time that he was there. If he wasn't there, I might not have been able to get the surgery that I needed. And, we're talking, I was at the hospital for 10 minutes before they brought me into the emergency surgery.
So there's
like,
no screwing around. You're right in. Oh my
time
goodness.
was of the essence. Yeah.
So yeah, that's obviously really eye-opening then. So you're a 15-year-old kid, you gain a certain perspective that most don't, basically. And so
right.
At what point after all, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of, healing and all these other things, but when did this realization that you're crediting this to occur, in terms of saying like, first there's the soul searching and then there's the answer, right? Like I don't know how much you want to get into that, but I'd love to understand, okay.
No, I'll get into it. I love getting into it because I think it's an important lesson for people to hear, because, and like, I think that no matter how old you are or whatever you're going through, like you can kind of feel this. Like I was only 15 years old, but when you're faced with something like that, you start to kind of like think differently. And like, I had a couple months of recovering after that. I couldn't even like fly back for a few weeks because of like the surgery, like you can't fly, whatever. So I was like down there for like 3 weeks, just like kind of like recovering. Then I came back home to Boston. A couple months went by, and like I was pretty like in my head worried about the fact that I had lost my spleen, because I had to get my spleen removed. And like, the spleen kind of has certain like functions with your immune system. So I was like, oh, am I going to have like a compromised immune system? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, WebMDing all this shit, like freaking out. And, so it was kind of just taking a toll on me mentally. And then I just I had this point, and I like remember it very specifically. I was like sitting in my room, and I was just like, all right, I can either I'm 15 years old. I can either be, for the rest of my life, be the guy who, had this thing happen, and now I'm going to be worried about it for the rest of my life. And like, that's what's going to define me. I'm just going to be like miserable, like worried about it, like anxious, whatever. Or I can take this gift that I was given of like another shot. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of how I looked at it, like another shot to like just do this and like live my life, and like almost like just be thankful that I'm here. And like it almost felt like I owed it to God or whoever, like that I got to do something positive with this. And I was at this like fork in the road, and I was like, that's the route that I'm going to take. I'm going to be thankful and understand that anything could happen every single day. So I'm going to leave it all out on the field every single day. When I was 15, that was like, all right, well, fuck school. I'm just going to go like heavy into music. Like that was like me leaving it all out there, because I was like, I don't care. Like, so it was a little bit of an arrogance at the time, but that also just shaped who I am as a person and the way that I approach everything in my life. It's like, I don't believe in like it not being possible in a lot of ways. Like you can do a lot of things. You just got to like put your energy towards it and like just try.
That's really interesting, because the timing of that's really incredible that I'm thinking of, is that you gain a more what I would call a more mature perspective at a very young age in terms of, thinking about what you want to do with your life. And it happens at a time when you literally have nothing to lose in terms of going out and actually trying it,
Right.
It's like, it's not like the 45-year-old with 3 kids saying, screw it. I'm going to try this other thing now. Like you got that opportunity. That's really, really great. And you seem to really capitalize on it. And if I understood you right, and I was going to push quickly back, you were audio engineering for others and doing your own sort of recording. I think you used the words in secret, sort of. This was when the secret was out. Like, you're done.
Yeah, I had a point like after that where I was working on a song with a friend of mine, and he was like, why don't you put something down? I was like, yeah, I mean, like, for sure. Like, I'm gonna write something crazy. And then, and I just had this new energy. And so I got in the studio and like laid down this verse, and it was just like a super corny verse, but at the time it was just like, oh, that shit was gas. Like, this is crazy. And it just like, made me addicted to the studio in terms of like writing and recording and like making this art. Yeah. And I think that for me, like a lot of my attraction to music and art and everything probably does like stem from this kind of existential perspective that I have of like, I want to create things that last longer than me. Like, that's why I love like creating like music, in business, like whatever. Like, I just want to make things that survive me. You know what I'm saying? Totally because I want to like, yeah.
So what was the tipping point then? You're recording some music, you're putting some things out there. Maybe, this is always the part that fascinates me, is that when people go from this, I've got a little attention, to suddenly I have a lot of attention. You watch like the bio flicks of all these bands, and it's suddenly, it's the next scene and there's like a jillion people in the crowd. You're like, wait, what happened? Like, so that's what I want to get into here. Like, what was the tipping point, do you think, where it went from, I mean, was it a slow burn, or was there like I don't want to say overnight, but was it a little faster than that? Like, how did that go from hobby to like a real thing?
See, that's the thing. Is like, it was never a hobby for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, mentally in my head, I was successful before I was successful. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just looked at it like, this is like once I came back from the jet ski thing and like went all in, and I'm 16 years old, and I was just like I truly, like I gave up on schoolwork. Like, I like failed some classes. Like, I went all in, and like it, and I don't recommend that like for people listening to this, but I'm just saying, like, for me, like the confidence level that I had was like just nuts and like not realistic at all. But I think that like calculated delusion is like super important with all this stuff. And like looking back as a little bit older and wiser person now, like I realized that the benefit of my mentality was incredibly, there was a huge benefit there. The mental kind focus, of aspect that I had focus. Where it was just like, I was delusional. I was just like, I can do this. Like, and like, I guess it wasn't delusion because it ended up kind of like, working out.
And that's what I want to get at. But how did it work out? I mean, there's the want, and then there's right. the other side of it. There's the audience. So when did that audience appear?
Yeah, so I think, exactly. And so like it was that like first you have to be there mentally, like, and not look at it as a hobby, not think that like you can have a backup plan. Like I didn't have a backup plan. Like all my friends were getting ready to go to college, and I couldn't get into college because I fully committed to the music thing, and so my grades weren't there. And I never really was a good student to begin with because I don't know, I just always like felt like I understood the stuff and I didn't need to put the work in. And like, again, I think that that's just that young arrogance that I have. But like, my mentality was I'm going all in. And so I literally just like hustled it. And so it just was, at first it was like a little slow grind of like little wins. Like, I put a song out on YouTube and it got 600 views overnight. And I was like, wow, like, everyone in my high school like listened to the song, and it was like the talk of the high school. And then it started to be like, he put out another song on YouTube and Facebook, which were the only two things back then. Like there was no Instagram, whatever. Like, then it was like, okay, like there's some surrounding towns around my town that like are starting to find out like that I make music. And so it was like literally a bootstrapped, like geographical, like, people in my area finding out that I made music. I printed 400 CDs, sold them at my school, sold them around the town, sold them around other towns with my two friends, just like like kind of just like hustled it. And that was like my first taste of like, okay, like people, you know, and like I think people thought like, oh, like it's a joke or whatever, and they were like, no, like all right, like he's actually rapping, like he can actually make music, but like, you know, kind of like, what is this, blah blah blah. And so then it just became like an obsession of like, I'm gonna do anything I can to just like get traction. And obviously, you know, 2010, this is like blogs, good music all day, bro Bible, like that was like the shit back then. And like Sammy Adams had just started like popping off on YouTube, and like Bro Bible was supporting him super tough, and like he put out like this album Boston's Boy, which like went to #1, and everyone was like, who the fuck is this dude? And so I'm like, all right, like this is a dude like from my city, like another white rapper like popping off, like I gotta figure out how to like get plugged in with him. And so then I'm like, you know, all right, like let me see, like, okay, he's working with this dude Matty, and Matty's producing his whole stuff, like I gotta work with Matty too. If this is like the top guy like in my like kind of genre, and like he's working with this guy, like I gotta work with this guy too.
I love that. See, that's the kind of stuff I love getting into. I don't want to get too much into the business side of what we do and whatnot, but I'm a big believer in, so I deal with communications, I deal with words, I deal with writing, I deal with talking to people. And I always say that the key to be a good writer is to listen and see what other people are doing, right? That's what you did. You basically, you weren't just writing music. You weren't just saying, hey, here, listen to me. You were listening and watching what others were doing and figuring out that path by virtue of paying attention.
As a growing artist or songwriter, keeping royalties coming in is important for keeping the bills paid. It's also important to keep an eye on those royalty payments. A lot of people we worked with here at Royalty Exchange were having a tough time making sense of the royalties they were getting paid. So we built a free tool called Know Your Worth that automatically analyzes every royalty payment made on your music. It breaks it all down in an easy-to-understand analysis with some insights that would be impossible to find elsewhere. Plus, it connects you with the thousands of investors on Royalty Exchange and allows them to make you offers on your music. So far, musicians have raised over $1 million for new projects, new ventures, and a whole lot of other things just through the Know Your Worth app. If you're earning royalties, you should be keeping track of them, and Know Your Worth makes it easy. It only takes about 3 minutes to connect an account, and the tool will automatically update over time. Just visit worth.royaltyexchange.com or find the link in the show notes to get started. Now, let's get back to the interview.
You know, we call the podcast The Big Break, right? And so we always kind of look for, you know, was there that one little gambit, that one little ploy that you tried that had the big payoff?
Yeah, so you know, I started to just kind of like get connected with these people in my city that were actually like doing stuff, right? And then that kind of elevated the music. Like I started working with Matty, and the music started getting better because he really knew his stuff on the production. And I was like, all right, this needs to all like be wrapped around like one big thing. Like, and so I wanted to make a mixtape. And so I started basically working on this music to put out this mixtape called 1993, which is like when I was born. And I just, you know, put my heart into that music and just really like hustled the music and put it out on Dat Piff and used Facebook and used YouTube to like promote and market everything, and tried to like get in with the people who wrote at Good Music All Day, which was a big blog at the time, and they supported it super tough. I think Bro Bible actually like sponsored the mixtape too. So I was just like working different angles, reaching out to people, you know, cold emailing, doing everything I could to just like hustle it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And like it obviously that's not a strategy necessarily that like works now. Like blogs are kind of irrelevant now, but like it's just like whatever's going on at the time, like figure out everything you can do to just give yourself a little bit of like a step.
Yeah, I think what applies now is what you did with a couple different things. On one hand, you're making lots of different types of music and you know, experimenting with your sound and who you were and what you wanted to say and how you wanted it to sound and things like that. And then on the other side, you were looking, okay, how does this stuff appear in the market? Who are the folks that I want to emulate, and what do they do, and how do I, match that? And then at some point, bring the two together. Okay, you now have a good idea how to, navigate the level of the business where you're at, and how to kind of move a song through, channels, and you understand what needs to happen in the studio. And when you bring those two together in the one focal point, I think is how you put it, and then push it out there strongly. That was the strategic approach that you took, that regardless of what the different paths were and how they may change over time, that concept of understanding both sides of it, the creation and the distribution, that I think still applies today.
100%. And so I kind of used all those different ideas and concepts and just kind of like took a gamble on it, essentially.
Yeah.
And I put the mixtape out, and I remember being, at the library, releasing the mixtape on my computer, and all of a sudden it got like 6,000 downloads in like the first like minute. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, how is it even doing that? And it was because like, all these different kind of places that I was like reaching out to help promote it, like they were pushing in, they had like real reach. And, I was a 17-year-old kid at the time, and the mixtape like ended up like crashing dat piff. And like just became this like big like thing. Like, who is this kind of like geeky looking like white rapper kid who's, like crashing dat piff, and like, what is this music? And then like I had this video for this song called Rain, which was just me in New York City, like looking funny, like just rapping, like spitting like hard bars. And like, I think that it just was like a moment in time. And overall there was like a moment going on in music at the time in the Northeast with like a lot of like online, publications and like just like, music videos. And this was when like Mac Miller was taking off, and like, a lot of different artists started to like pop off in this kind of subgenre of music. And like, it just became, this kind of moment in time where a lot of like dope artists kind of got their shot because they were, supported by these blogs, and like, YouTube was a big thing, but not everybody was on YouTube yet. It was like, it was to independently be producing your own music videos on YouTube was a relatively new idea. And like, it became like this whole cool moment. And I think a lot of artists like Skizzy Mars and like, all these other dudes like really came up during that time. And it was just a cool moment in time.
That's great.
For music.
Yeah, you got good timing, you got talent, you've got hustle and a little bit of luck. You put those things together and usually something happens. So is this when Atlantic comes calling, or am I too soon in the story?
No, that's essentially the next thing. I mean, there was some time between that, but the 1993 mixtape was what I think kind of got the real music industry aware of what was going on, because the numbers, you couldn't not look at the numbers, you know what I'm saying? And like, you're just like, who is this like young kid doing these numbers or whatever? And so, yeah, I got an email from Atlantic Records, or some person at Atlantic Records when I was still in high school. And
what I love about this part,
I thought it was a joke.
Yeah, I mean, I love this part of the story. I might skip ahead a little bit, so please roll me back if I need to. But this idea that you wanted to go through the process as like your form of education. You say you were a bad student, but you kind of just, in fact, you were a good student, but it's in a different school.
Totally. I always like, because, I ended up kind of getting the opportunity to do a deal with them. And I was like, I might not know everything about this whole situation, but I guarantee you that if I spend 4 years working with a company like this, at the very least, that's going to be my college education. While all my peers are going to college, that's my college education. That's how I looked at it. I kind of thought that like one way or another, there was a positive there.
Right. Knowledge is easy to carry, as they say. Like you're gonna get some out of it. Can you talk a little bit about, positive or negative, what you learned? What were the big takeaways? What were the big lessons you think?
I mean, I learned everything about the music industry, honestly. Like, I learned how it operated. I learned, what A&Rs were. I learned, how to market music, how not to market music. I learned a lot about what not to do in that situation too. Because, and again, timing, right? Like this was 2011. Music was changing. Spotify wasn't a thing yet. iTunes was, CD sales were not any, like the industry wasn't making money anymore. Right. And so they had to figure out new ways to generate revenue from artists. They're doing these 360 deals now. They're trying to like kind of get a piece of everything, but they didn't really have it figured out like they do. The
dust had yet to settle.
Yeah. It was kind of a shit show. I mean,
I remember. I totally remember this. I totally get it.
So it was just kind of a crazy time. And, I'm coming in 18 years old, coming in hot, thinking I'm going to be the next like fucking Justin Bieber. And, I had like a little bit of like an arrogance and just like overconfidence. And, I took that to the situation with the label and, kind of realized that my setup wasn't what I thought it was. And like, they didn't know exactly what their business plan was yet. And I was kind of like trying to, do all these different things, but like, I didn't have the infrastructure set up from the label or from my team or anything like that to really do anything great yet. Because as you know, anything takes, a whole team of effort to really, do something at a high level. And so, that was kind of like my first realization is like, oh wow, like I need to get serious. Like, it's one thing to put a mixtape out, at my library and like have it pop off because like, a couple websites posted it, but it's another thing to, when you're on a major label, you're competing against, all the artists that are on that roster now. And so you're in the big leagues and it's like, you gotta step up. So, I kind of had to take that mental shift and like, that was my learning experience and everything. And so then I ended up kind of doing that whole process and it was a 1 album deal and I did that album and then I was kind of like, there was an option to like do another project. And I was just like, what I learned from this, and this was 2012 now, 2013, like, these guys don't have it figured out yet. Like there's like I'm just going to be shelved and like, writing songs for other people and like getting, taken advantage of essentially. And if I really want to be successful, like I have to put it back in my hands. So I was like, I have to go independently to create the career that I want.
That's interesting.
And that was like my route. Like I always wanted to be the dude who signed me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I looked at the dude who signed me like this guy's got it figured out. Like I need to pick up game from like these people because I want to be like that. You know what I'm saying? Like I want to be the dude, the investor, the shark, like, like that's fun.
That's interesting. So it sounds like there's a couple lessons there. I'm going to sort of summarize here. Tell me if I'm off or if I'm on here or not. So that one was the aspect of competition, right? Any artist putting music out into the world is competing with just a veritable shit ton of other artists putting music into the world. So there's that level of competition. And then coming into the label, you realize you're also competing for the resources of the label amongst even a smaller group, but that competition is almost even more impactful, even harder, because it's more of it provides the result you need when you're trying to put the music out more broadly. Like you need to get those resources that you want.
Right.
And on top of that, you realize not everyone knows what's going on. Like the importance of a team, of a coordinated team that is all marching towards the same goal and whatnot, and having all those ducks in a row, as it were. Those seem to be sort of the bigger things there that you kind of realize from, as you mentioned, releasing one thing off on the library versus a real coordinated effort. It's complicated.
It's super complicated, and it's just about, like anything, signing to a record label has nothing to do with signing to a record label. It's about who are you working with? It's
your team.
You know what I'm saying? Like who is the people? Yeah, who is your team? Who's the people at the label? Who is your management team? Like who are the people around you? And I realized the value in that, And I just for me, there wasn't enough upside for me to go that route for what they were offering me. I don't think that like the major label system believed in me to the level that I believed in me. And so like, I had to prove that. I had to prove the business plan. I had to prove my artistry and everything like that. And I knew that if I stuck with the major label system at a time where they were still kind of losing money and like not quite figuring out how to market new artists yet, and all this stuff, that it would have just been like a long process that I was like, I wasn't patient.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, for that. And I think that probably goes back to like my perspective on like just wanting to do everything I can right now today.
And you're willing to take more risks on yourself than they're willing to take risks on you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So now, did you go right to
exactly?
So this is where you leave, and did you form your own label right away, or was there a process there?
So I left, and then I took like 6 months and basically just like continued to just try and learn more. And then I just tried to learn a lot more about like business.
Well, where were you learning that?
Entrepreneurship. I ended up, I went back to Boston, and then I ended up kind of just like connecting with different like people that were in the entrepreneurial world, and like even like the tech world and like the food world, and starting to like, I was like kind of like almost on my like Gary Vee shit before Gary Vee was a thing, trying to like, let me run your social media, or like, let me help you with like your brand and like stuff like that. And I was just like kind of like getting to know business a little bit for like 6 months after the whole Atlantic situation, because I was like, again, like I'm young, like I was like 21 years old, whatever. I need to like learn the business so I can be the best CEO that I can be. And so I was kind of doing whatever, connecting different dots, meeting different people around Boston and like the entrepreneurial world, to kind of get my chops there. And so I did that for like 6 months. And while I was doing that, I was working on my next album, 1993 Volume 2. And so, that was kind of like the next chapter. And, like you said, talking about like risk, like all of this stuff took years to pay off. And I only started to really see like the success from different like standpoints, like very recently, only in the last like couple years. It was a hustle this whole time. You know what I'm saying?
One of the things that I find interesting about this conversation is that a lot of artists, particularly performing artists, right? There's this view of there's a creative side and there's a business side, and they need to be somehow separate, right? I'm going to work on the creative. I'm going to get a team to work on the business. You seem to blend those almost organically from the start. Like your creative output is actually benefited by all the work you do on the business side of it.
Yeah, 100%. For me, it's one thing, and it always will be one thing. And I don't think that's everybody's story. I know a lot of people who are just true artists, who are just so good at the art that's and it's like if they focus on something else, it almost throws them off. For me, that was never why I got into music. That I always, from the first day I started music, I started thinking about how can I get people to hear this. I started thinking about the business side of it. Because
it's like there's a creative component to the business side that actually fed the creative component of the recording side.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's just like, and I think that there's a lot of that in hip hop particularly.
That's
true.
What
I'm saying?
That's true.
And I think that's what's cool about hip hop as a genre is that there is that entrepreneurial sense more so than any other genre. Maybe country has a little bit of elements of that too, but like, there's a, hip hop historically was, and I'm a white kid doing hip hop, like, paying respect to the fact that like, this is a genre that was created, in a from people who were, in these environments where like, they weren't getting those opportunities to like, get their music heard. And so they had to make that opportunity themselves. And like people who pioneered hip hop were forced to, kind of be entrepreneurial because people weren't, supporting the genre when it first came out. And so, it's always had that entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that's what really, like attracted me to hip hop music. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And what's the idea is that you want to create this music, and there's, doing so takes, for lack of the crass term, money. Like, you've got to sustain yourself as just a person, eat, live, etc. You've got to pay for the recording. You got to pay the people that are, working with you on the album and all these things. And so to kind of figure out the different ways of doing that it's a hassle. And sometimes, it can distract from the creative process, but other times it could actually enhance the creative process. And I'm always interested in those kind of stories. I like to use the term creative executive officer for CEO.
Right.
So now you've done. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that business side of things. Like, you've had, when you went to go and start your label and whatnot. How did that come about? Did your album at Atlantic do well enough that you had some funding to go and start the label, or was it all just kind of back to the square one hustle again?
I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, I at the time, by that point, I had a little bit of a catalog, independently, even because I had music before I did the Atlantic deal. Then I had the Atlantic catalog, and obviously I wasn't getting a lot from that because
they got
to recoup.
Yeah,
and so it took some time to start to see money from that stuff, but. Yeah, it was just reinvesting everything that was coming through. You know what I'm saying? And being entrepreneurial and trying to get out on the road and sell merchandise, sell tickets, do shows, sell physical CDs on the web store, create a merch brand, and just reinvesting into videos it's a commitment. Like any startup, any business, you're feeding the business before you're feeding yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Feeding the business first.
And I did that for 5 years before I really started to feel good. You know what I mean?
Now, did you build out a team at the label as well? This goes back to the team lesson you learned at Atlantic a little bit, right? Making sure you had the right people doing the right things.
Yeah, and so then when I left that situation, I started to kind of figure out who are my guys that I can really count on to be working with me, and I kind of built a core group of people around me, and some people I'd been working with from the beginning, like Matty, and others. I kind of met along the way and just kind of formed this group of people around me that supported my business. That and I think it's important when you go into business with people, you give people skin in the game. You allow everyone to take a part of, the back end, because then that creates, a mutual interest to succeed. And so, I think you always got to think about, compensating people the right way, to create an environment where everyone wants to hustle, because the more we all collectively hustle, the more we all collectively see the benefits.
Do you want to take a minute to talk about who that team is now and give them a little props?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my guy Tim, who I've worked with for years, he's been on the management side from the jump, essentially. I met him right when I started to do the Atlantic deal, and we started to work together, since 2013. Matty, has mixed and mastered and engineered every single song I've put out since I was 16 years old, and still does today. And the album I'm working on right now, I'm going to his studio tomorrow to start working on. And so those two guys and my homie Saeed and, my buddy Multiple Pete's, who is a producer and my best friend from growing up, that group of people, and other people around me, my friend Blaine, who's another artist, who's also just my guy on the road, DJing, just doing everything basically, and a lot more people too. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot. It takes a village, sure. I think.
And do you have any? Does the label? I'm not sure about the roster of the label and where that stands. Is it a artist in particular that you've got signed right now, or are you still in development?
Yeah, I mean, I'm, most of my company right now is, I look at it in phases. The first phase was supporting what I'm doing, my music, and I'm still deeply a part of being an artist first and using my label to support my music, but I've also been doing other projects with other artists, and I've had some projects come out. I had an artist, Buckets, who did a project, and and Blaine is like I said, he's an artist too, and we've been working on his project for a while too, and a couple other things that aren't necessarily formalized, but that's, I look at it in phases. Like phase 1, pushing my stuff. Phase 2, more artists on the repertoire.
Right. And talk a little bit about just the state, how you look at the music business today. We talked a lot about how you came up and the different components that you utilize to kind of get your start. As we both know, it's a much different industry today, right? The dust has settled to a certain extent. You've got these streaming platforms that are pretty much the norm now. How do you look at today's landscape? And if you were starting out today, would there be things that you would do differently, or are there particular avenues that you're particularly excited about, that you're looking forward to testing?
Well, I think that overall, life in general is just in a really cool spot now because, as you guys know, you can pretty much produce your own content from anywhere in the world now and create your own brand. And, we as a society are consuming media and music in a way that's completely different than it ever was. And it's democratized media consumption in such a way that is like so empowering to the artists, and not just in music, in all art forms. Because I think with more choice and more accessibility and more ease of production, it just naturally democratizes the market. So people can be who they want to be and create the art that they want to create, as opposed to a system and a market that's controlled by bigger companies choosing what's going to be successful and choosing what to push and what to put money behind. So I just think that, overall in music, in media in general, this is just such an incredible time that will probably go down as like one of the most important shifts culturally in media, because it's just the barriers to entry are completely different.
The gatekeepers are basically been completely disaggregated from all the things that they controlled in the past. And I'm not here to knock the record labels have a play. No, I'm just saying that what you used to go to one place for to get everything. Like you used to go to a label and they had the studios, right? They had the distribution, they had the marketing, they had the funding. You could do all those things yourself in different ways now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like we'd be a fool to say that like it's just going to stay like that, and like, big corporations are not going to come from this, but it's just changing. You know what I'm saying? And like for example, like, companies that used to be the big movie studios are now not as relevant as Netflix. But like Netflix is a younger, more progressive, company. And like I think that it's good for film and TV that like Netflix is now like the major parent company of like that industry. It's good to have a shakeup. And so we're going to see, and we're already seeing in the music industry, Spotify and companies like that becoming the new quote unquote major labels or major players in this game. And they are the gatekeepers now in a lot of ways. And they know that, you know what I'm saying? But it's just, I think it's still, it's good because it's a shakeup and like, but my point is like, I think it's naive to say that like, major business is not in control or whatever like that. It's all that's always going to be a thing. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think that like the companies are changing.
Yeah. Is there anyone that you look to as an inspiration or as an example for what it is that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I look to some of my peers who are doing a great job of like, just running their own business and like really marketing their music and their brand in a way that's like really effective, and like, they're just having fun with it. Like my homie Young Gravy is a great artist, and like, he has such a particular lane that he's gone down and it's so successful for him. Other than that, I look at every entrepreneurial artist inspires me. You know what I'm saying? From, Kanye to Nipsey Hussle, people like that, who created their own businesses.
You've mentioned in the past atmosphere as an influence as well.
Yeah, atmosphere is another. I think it's just having that belief in yourself, and like when other people aren't gonna support what you're trying to do, making your own company to support what you're trying to do. You know what I'm saying? And like I think that Atmosphere and Rhymesayers as a company is just like the coolest example of like, we don't need to be Hollywood. We don't need to be like New York, like whatever, like we're Minnesota, like we're our own thing. Let's create our own scene. Let's create our own company to support the art and the culture of like this area, and, and not care about, not be attached to the results right away, and just do it and like believe in it. And then
playing your game, not playing their game.
Yeah, exactly. And like I always say, like I'm not in the music business. I'm in the Cam Meekins business. You know what I mean? And like I don't like, what does the music industry have to do with what I'm doing? I'm worried about selling T-shirts and making music. You know what I mean?
Well, I think I could go on and ask you other questions, but I think that's a wonderful place to basically end in terms of my interrogation here. Is there anything you wanted to I don't know, bring up, point out, endorse, promote, discuss before we end today?
Well, I just want to shout out you guys, man. I think that everything that you guys are doing is really cool. I love this podcast. I love the fact that you're bringing artists on to kind of talk the business side and the creative side, because I think that that's what people want to hear. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that have this entrepreneurial drive inside them. And I just want to say to anybody listening, like we were talking about, I think a big theme of a lot of this is like that, believing in yourself to the point that it's almost a delusion. Like just, don't listen to the noise. Like, anybody can tell you how to do it. They never did it. Just, trust that gut instinct that you have and just go and execute, and, don't be attached to the results, because, there's not enough, that's not enough of a sample size to really like, know anything yet. Just keep going and going and going. Other than that, man, for me, I got an album on the way coming a little bit later this year.
Does it have a name yet?
I hope people check that out. It does have a name, but I haven't announced it yet.
I don't want to break embargo here. I'll let you go. That's cool. Well, listen, I want to say that also from our end, it's been an absolute pleasure working with you over the years. I hope to do so, obviously again soon. And, that definitely, keep in touch. Thanks for everything. Thanks for taking the time today.
You already know. Thank you, man.
Thanks for joining us. To keep up with Cam's new releases, check out his social media profiles linked in the show notes. We'll be back every other week with a brand new episode. Until then, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.